Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing my September reading wrap up. As of last month, I stopped doing as many statistics in the beginning of my videos. I still gather my statistics and look at them. I just got so bored with talking about them, but I love statistics. Some people comment on my wrap-ups being like, oh, reading is about enjoyment. It's not about statistics or how much you can do. And I always just kind of leave those comments alone because I genuinely enjoy statistics. I like math, I like numbers, I like seeing how things progress and how well I do across month to month to month. My channel is going to be a lot more of what I feel like doing in the future and less of what I feel like I have to do. The exciting news is in September I did join Storygraph. As of right now, I'm not sharing my profile with anyone. So if you want to follow me and see everything, I post the same exact content on Goodreads. The reason why I mentioned Storygraph is because it also comes up with its statistics that you can see every single month. And so I think I'm going to start sharing some of those with you guys moving forward. But I joined halfway through the month. So in October, maybe I'll start sharing some of my Storygraph stats. The other thing that was really weird about this month is I didn't finish a single book until the 6th of the month. And then the next time I finished a book was the 11th. I read majority of my books from the 15th through the 30th. Also, this month sucked. When I look at the books I read, I genuinely didn't have a good time. A lot of these books I picked up specifically because I thought I was going to really enjoy them. I think I actually only have one book that's an actual 5-star. So I read 11 books this month with a 3.46 average rating. I only read one fantasy book this month, 5 horror, 3 sci-fi, 1 dystopian, and 1 magical realism. So maybe that's why I didn't enjoy this month as much as previous months. Also, I ended up hauling a shit ton of books. My currently owned not read pile is at 43, and when I started this month it was at 31 or 2, something like that. But let's get into talking about the books that I read and what I thought about them. So the first book that I read this month was We Can Never Leave This Place, and when I was going back through, I had no memory of this book. I had to go on Goodreads and look at the cover before I was oh, it was that book. This is by Eric LaRocca. It is a horror novella. I read the Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by him, and I really enjoyed it, and I rated it 4 stars the month before. So I was wanting to try some of his other stuff. So I was on the fence if I wanted to read You've Lost a Lot of Blood, I think is the other one, or this book. And after reading the first chapter of both, I decided I was way more interested in this book because the other one is told in written format, letter written format almost. And I'm just not a fan of that. So I decided to try this one, and that was a huge mistake because this might be my least favorite book that I've read this year. Actually, I don't know why I'm saying might. It is my least favorite book that I read this year. I ended up rating it a 1 star. I also wrote up a whole paragraph to 2 of my friends trying to describe the events that happened in this book, and if I were to say them out loud to you all, this video would be taken down. So I'm not going to be able to spoil a lot of the book, but it is about this young girl who her and her mom and her dad are stuck in this house, and her dad can leave sometimes. And we start off at the beginning of the story with these 2 men show up on their doorstep being we have the body of your father, he's dead, and it is his body. And they bring the body into the house, and they have a funeral, and people show up for the funeral. And after the funeral, the mom doesn't want to get rid of the body, and then these anthropomorphic animals show up. The first one is a spider, and he's there to help the mom, and it's very sexual. But then you also, I don't know how much I should spoil about this book. Then there's a rat that shows up, or is it a snake? I think both show up at different times. So these animals start showing up and trying to help these people, but also things are, I'm not going to do a good job explaining this book, but basically I can say I do not recommend reading this book. It was weird, not in a good way, and I was aghast. The only reason why I finished it was because it was so short. After that, I did read Nemesis Games. So I started this book, I want to say it was back in March, and then I decided to pause it because I just wasn't feeling it at the time. This is the 5th book in The Expanse by James S.A. Corey, the first book being Leviathan Wakes. And I've really enjoyed all the books in the series, and I did really enjoy this, and I'm glad I finished it, and I'm moving on to the 6th one as we speak. So I put this book down a while ago because I think I just went through them too quickly. There was just too much and I needed something different after a while. So I took some months off and I came back to it, and I'm really glad I did that because I ended up rating this book a 4-star. I think that does make it my least favorite in the series. I will stand with that because in this book we are following, what's really cool is, gotta back up a little bit. In the previous books, we're following James Holden and his crew, and then different POVs from like different points that are going to be important to the plot, but never at any point are we following POVs of James Holden's crew. And in this book, what's really cool is the 4 POVs are his crew. So you're following James Holden, you're following Naomi, you're following Amos, and you're following Alex. And those are the 4 characters. And so I really enjoyed that because we never get to see their perspective at any other point in the series, but you're with them and so you're familiar and comfortable with them. The thing I didn't like about that though is it meant that they all separated. And one of my favorite things about reading is seeing characters interact with each other. I really don't like when characters get separated and then they're off doing their own things. And even though they were interacting with other characters, I just felt like I was missing that homey feeling that I've had in the previous books, seeing this like found family be together and like save the universe. I really enjoyed it, and I can continue to say that this is one of my favorite sci-fi series. That's not saying much though, because I just got into sci-fi like earlier this year and I haven't read too many of series yet. Up next, I read Primal Animals, and what's really fun about this is a YA horror about a young girl who goes away to a summer camp, and when she goes to the summer camp, she joins this like secret sisterhood cult that's there, and the cult sisterhood whatever is all about like justice, and so they end up killing boys who have wronged women, girls at this camp. Our main character kind of spirals into this madness of like, we shouldn't be killing people, that's wrong. So first off, I rated this a 4.5. I really loved it. Also, it has like a 3.2 on Goodreads, and I'm pretty convinced that the only horror I like love is horror that's got like a 3.5 or lower. I mean, it's not like a hard and fast rule, but it seems to be like pretty common that if your YA horror does poorly on Goodreads, I'm going to obsess over it. So things I really loved about this book, it reminded me so much of the summer I worked at a summer camp, and that was a horrible experience, and I like actually left with PTSD and lots of other issues, and I don't say that lightly. Like I legitimately mean that. This almost helped me like see that summer as like a joke kind of a thing. I don't know fully how to explain. It's been long enough that it wasn't triggering for me, but it did remind me of some of the like ridiculousness that happens at these types of summer camps. It's the kind where you go for like months and it's like rich kids who are just like having fun in the woods. I also really enjoyed our main character. She is, I can't remember if she's bisexual or if she's a lesbian, but she does have a sapphic relationship in the book, and I really enjoyed seeing that. I also really enjoyed the way that you see certain characters changes throughout the book, and you start to realize that like first impressions don't mean anything, and as you go, it was such a good, enjoyable book, and I felt myself like not wanting to put it down and just I just kept reading it. The thing I didn't like about it was the ending. I felt like I just didn't agree with our main character's actions, and it was in such a way that it kept me from enjoying the ending. Sometimes characters do things, and even though I know they're a character and they're allowed to make dumb decisions and mistakes, I just so disagree with those decisions that I have to like lower the rating. So that's what came up with this one. Otherwise it would have been a 5-star. Next, I read These Fleeting Shadows by Kate Alice Marshall, who is one of my favorite YA horror authors. I have read 2 of her other books and given both of them 5 stars, and then this one I was so excited about because on the back it's compared to Knives Out and The Haunting of Hill House, which I haven't seen The Haunting of Hill House or read it, but Knives Out is one of my favorite movies. I see the comparison. I understand fully why they would compare it to that, but I think they missed like a lot of the essence that I loved in Knives Out to call it that. I didn't love this book, basically, is what it boils down to. In fact, I found myself very bored with it. It's very gothic. I struggle with gothic works. That's common. I've known that about myself for a while. I picked it up because I trust Kate Alice Marshall, and I'm going to continue to trust her, but this is definitely not a book that I will be recommending to people moving forward. Our main character, whose name I don't remember, Helen, and her grandfather passes, and with his passing, he leaves in his will basically everything that he owns, which is like mansions and millions of dollars, to his granddaughter, Helen. And Helen has like barely ever met him. Like her mom and her family are not close with the rest of her mom's family. The caveat is that in order for her to inherit all of this, she has to stay in the house for a year, and the house seems to be haunted. And when she gets there, there's just kind of this like craziness, and she's trying to figure out if her grandfather was murdered. I really wanted it to succeed because I loved Rules for Vanishing so much. After that, I picked up Blood Like Fate. Oh my god, I got 2 books mixed up. I just now realized that when I was talking about Blood Like Fate, I was actually describing This Poison Heart. Apologies. When I was talking about Blood Like Fate, the entire time I was describing This Poison Heart. I'm going to leave my summary for This Poison Heart here. This was one of my 12 books to read in 12 months, and so far I've only read 2 of those, and I should be much farther along on that list. I really enjoyed it. I almost rated this one 5 stars as well, but there were some things that happened kind of with the like rising action that kept me from rating it a full 5 stars, and so I rated it a 4.5. Overall, I highly recommend this book. It's one of the few YA fantasies that I have read in a long time that I just like felt like I couldn't put down. It felt so unique and so original, and yet like not so far out there that it was like done poorly. We're following this main character, and she is adopted, and she finds out that her biological aunt has died, and she was the only person left in her biological family, and so she inherits a house. I didn't realize I read 2 of those this month. I also read 2 books about summer camps this month. So her and her 2 moms go out to stay at the house because they live in New York City and it's just getting way too expensive, and so they want to like check the house out and see how it goes. Our main character also has the ability to like control plants and help them grow, and so when she gets to this house, she starts to realize that everyone in her family had that ability, and so she starts to learn more about that ability and trying to figure things out and trying to figure out kind of what happened to her aunt, while also starting up the apothecary that they used to run out of their house. And because of that, she meets a lot of people from the town, and it was a really enjoyable book. The thing I didn't like, I don't know how to say this, I tend to not enjoy Greek myths as much as I enjoy other mythologies, and I think because it took me by surprise and because I felt like it just didn't totally fit, that I was not happy with that decision. That's the nicest way I can say that. Basically what happened is like a lot of the Greek myths end up being real. I just wasn't ready for it. I just wasn't ready for it. I will be reading book 2. I actually already have a hold on it. I think it's just a duology. Our main character is also, I also don't remember if she's bisexual or just a lesbian. I think she's pansexual. But the book is very queer and very open about its queerness. And one of the things I really loved about it was it has this whole conversation about how friendship is just as important as romance. People of the opposite sex or gender can still be friends with each other, and it doesn't mean that they're going to like date with each other or like automatically have to be in a romance with each other. There was a twist at the end that I really enjoyed, and actually there was a couple of twists at the end that I really enjoyed, and I had such a good time, and I read it all in one day, and I haven't done that in such a long time. It was just such a fun book. This Poison Heart, I did rate a 4.5, and I will now talk about Blood Like Fate. So Blood Like Fate is the sequel to Blood Like Magic, which is a YA dystopian sci-fi book. It's described as fantasy, but it's sci-fi. And in this world, there are black witches, and they are kind of underground. But in book 1, our main character has to deal with this society has like reintroduced this new genetic experiment where you can like genetically be, you can find your soulmate. And when our main character decides to sign up and do that, she realizes that like her soulmate is kind of her arch nemesis kind of a thing. Anyways, there's a lot of stuff that happens. It was a really good book. I highly recommend it. I'm not doing it justice here, but I also really enjoyed the sequel. I ended up rating it 4 stars as well. I'm glad it's a duology. It's finished. It's complete. The sequel did a good job of wrapping everything up, and I didn't feel bored with it, and I didn't feel like it was fillery, and it's kind of what I want from sequels a lot of time, where I just don't feel like it's dragging on and on and on. Next, I read The Women Could Fly, which was by Megan, I want to say Giddings, but I might be wrong. It'll be here on the screen though. She wrote Lakewood, which I really, really enjoyed. That's like a psychological horror. This book was more of a dystopian, kind of around the vein of The Handmaid's Tale, kind of around the vein of like Vox, if you've read either of those. Our main character is 28 years old and she lives in a world where when you turn 30, if you are an unmarried woman, you are basically deemed a witch, and witches aren't allowed rights like the rest of people are, and so every single woman has to basically get married to a man before she turns 30. Also, like, magic is real in this world, but it is also seen as bad. So like if you show that you have magic, you can either be killed or worse or better depending on where you live in the country. And our main character, the mother goes missing, and her father decide finally to like deem her as dead. And when they do that, this like will shows up, and in the will our main character is allowed to inherit certain things. Oh my god, why did I read so many books about people inheriting things? But she has to go to this island first and take a picture, and when she's on this island she finds magic and like a colony of witches who are living together in peace, and she kind of has to make the decision of whether or not she wants that future where she can do whatever she wants with her life, but she has to leave behind all of her friends and family, or if she wants to go back to her friends and family, but then is forced into a marriage with a man that she doesn't really care for, yada, 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 yada. I didn't love this one either. I think that, first off, it was marked as a horror online, and it's definitely not. It's a dystopian, which like dystopians can be horrific for sure. Some of the themes and concepts were definitely horrifying, but I just felt like it wasn't really that, like it was more focused on the dystopian element and the magical realism element than it was on the horrific elements of the world. So I just didn't totally love that I went into this expecting it to be a horror, especially when Lakewood was such a good horror. And then second, I like so frustrated with our main character. Like, do you ever read a book and your main character is like forced to make a decision basically to like live in a magical land or to live in our world, and they're like struggling with it, and you're sitting there screaming at them like, live in the magical land. Like, why would you ever come back to Earth? Especially when in this book, Earth was treating her so poorly. By the end, I did like where it concluded, but there was a lot of stuff that getting to that conclusion frustrated the hell out of me. In some of the aspects, like the points the book was trying to make, it just fell a little flat. So this one wasn't a win for me. I ended up rating it a 2-star. Next, I read The Shadows of Self, which is the sequel to The Alloy of Law, which is the second era of Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I've read this before. I really don't have much to say about this, to be honest. I rated it a flat 4-star. I didn't like it as much as The Alloy of Law, but I oftentimes don't like middle books in series as much as like first and final books in series. It's Mistborn, so you consume the metals and you can use magical abilities, let's call it, and it's in the Wild Wild West meets Industrial Revolution time period, and our main character Wax and Wayne are like ex-detectives. In this book, they've kind of gotten a pass from like the cops in the town to kind of be detectives in this big city. In book 1 though, Wax, I get the names mixed up, but Wax comes back after like a horrible event happens to him when he's like out in the countryside, and he comes back to the city because he's very wealthy, and his uncle dies and leaves him everything. Oh my god, he inherits a house. I'm not allowed to read any more books about people inheriting things. Not again. Never, never again. He's trying to leave his past behind, but he ends up not being able to do that anyways. And this is book 2, so more things are happening, more things are going on. It's fun. I have a few issues with Mistborn Era 2, mainly surrounding that whole entire like savior complex that Wax has, and then also around the whole entire like worship of cops. I don't think any of that was necessarily done on purpose, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. So I'm not enjoying Era 2 as much this time as I did the first time, and I used to always say like, oh, Era 1 is so much better as a fantasy, but Era 2 is so much more fun and so much more enjoyable to read that I oftentimes recommended people just, if they didn't like Era 1, please continue on, read Era 2. But I kind of think I'm going to stop doing that because it's just so, I can't think of what that word is, but like when you like are obsessed with police officers and like uplifting them. Next, I read The Burning Girls. This was by CJ Tudor. And this book is about this, I can't think of what she's called, but a female priest who her and her daughter are kind of forced to go be the vicars at this small town. And when they get there, the town has this history of way back when all of these young girls were burned as witches. And so it's kind of the story of this small town when these two women, the vicar and her daughter, move to this town and start to realize some weird things are happening. And then also the story of these two young girls who, like, let's call it 40 years ago, were in this town being raised by their mother, who did not treat them super well. And then a priest comes to town one day and starts to kind of do some weird things with them. I'm doing a horrible job explaining this book. Anyways, most of the mystery is surrounding why our main character is trying to hide from someone. And then also what happened to these two girls. Where are they now? Are they dead? What happened with them with the priest? There's a lot of religion, but it's definitely not shoved down your throat. Our main character herself even kind of admits to not fully believing everything that you'd think a lot of priests would believe. She's very understanding and like accepting of her daughter not being religious. I didn't end up loving it, and I read this because CJ Tudor wrote a book that I really loved. It was one of my favorite horror books. Oh, The Chalk Man. It was one of my favorite books ever. Oh, favorite horror books ever. And I decided to give this one a shot, but I ended up not loving it, and I rated it a 3-star. The twist of who done it, I didn't love. I didn't see it coming, so that's good, but I also I had a few issues with it. The next one I get to talk about is an arc that isn't coming out until October, and I was so honored that I got this arc from Tor.com because it is the sequel to Winter's Orbit, which is Ocean's Echo, and they're not really connected. Like, I keep saying sequel, but the covers are so similar, and if you go on Goodreads, they're not even like in a series together. Like, they're not even in a series of standalone books, but they're both very queer adult sci-fi books, which are like sci-fi romances. Okay, before I go into talking about this book, I just want to say that, like, I'm not a huge fan of fantasy romance. Like, there are some that have really worked for me, but majority of the time they don't. But I think that I really like sci-fi romance, and I need to find more of them. If you guys have any suggestions, like, please leave them down below. Iron Widow, I've read it. Really enjoyed it. Back to the book. The reason why they're connected is they do take place in the same world. There are some like cultural similarities between like the elements of the world between the two books, but they are completely separate stories. There aren't even like really Easter eggs between the two books. Ocean's Echo did answer a few questions that I had about some of the things in the world from the first book, but they're separate. They're separate. You don't need to read them one or the other to read either one of them. Is about these two men, one of which is a reader, one of which is an architect. And so these are people who, a reader has the ability to read minds, and an architect has the ability to, what they call it, writing, and they have the ability to control other people's minds. And so they can basically like write a command. People who are not able to block it have to do that command. They're like basically compelled to do that command until it's finished. And in this world, readers are pretty much outlawed. It's not necessarily said like, oh, you are outlawed, but if you use your reading ability at all, you will be either forced into the military or like arrested. And our main character, who has the reader ability, his aunt is in a very high position of power in the military, so he's always been able to kind of get away with his stuff, but he is just like a chaotic being of, he doesn't listen to rules and he doesn't follow any advice. And so he's kind of been on the run, kind of been hanging out with different criminals and stuff. And at the very beginning of the book, he's caught by his aunt, and she says, I'm done with giving you second chances and you screwing up. I'm sending you to the military and you're going to get synced with an architect, which basically means that their two brains will be connected and the reader almost no longer has free will. Now, the other character we're following, so that's Tenalin, and then we're following Surratt. And Surratt is the architect, and he is in the military because his mother was in the military and she ended up leading this like rebellious coup and then going down in history as like this horrible person. And he's not in the military to like redeem her or anything, but he's basically in it to just learn more about her and trying to figure out why she ended up doing this. He is the architect who is sent to sync with Tenalin, and when Surratt shows up and finds Tenalin on the ship where they're supposed to sync and then like lead the ship together on this mission, Surratt realizes that Tanalin was forced into this position, and so they fake their sync, and they basically have like a fake dating trope, but it's a fake synced trope, and the two of them have to like share a quarters together and pretend that they're synced and like try to convince a lot of people that they're doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing. I really loved like the first 60% of the book, and then I kind of didn't love the last 40% of the book. I ended up rating this one a 4-star, not a 5-star. The first 50% 5-star all the way. I had so much fun with seeing the two of them not even bounce off each other, but like kind of work together but almost at odds with each other. In the first 50%, I would have told you that I liked the two characters in this book way more than I liked the two characters in Winter's Orbit, which is saying something because I love my boys from Winter Orbit. But by the end, I will definitely say that Winter's Orbit was not only a better constructed book and a better, like more well-written book and easier to understand and easier to follow, but I feel like it had a much better resolution. I don't want to spoil anything with Ocean's Echo, but I feel like a lot of people are going to go into this book and then not enjoy it because the romantic payoff is not satisfying at the end. In Winter's Orbit, you get kind of a satisfying moment where they are together, and in Ocean's Echo, you don't. So the whole book is just like yearning and slow build, and like it's great. Let me tell you, like there's this scene where like their knees touch each other and I was squealing, but you really don't get a satisfying conclusion to their romance. Like it's kind of this idea of, you know, that they're going to continue to work on their relationship, but they're never like actually together in this book. And you know, one day, like, oh, you kind of have this vibe that one day they're going to get together after the book concludes, but it was just so dissatisfying for me. And I actually read it with a friend who also has the arc, and she felt very similarly to me. I also think that if you went into this book just wanting a sci-fi, it's perfectly fine sci-fi. Like if you're not here for the romance element, I think you'd enjoy it more. But if you're there for the romance element, you're not going to enjoy it as much. But I will say that some of the sci-fi elements definitely needed to be explained better and understood better, and some things were stuck on too long and some things weren't stuck on long enough. Where I stand is I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to add it to my shelf. I would possibly reread it, not as quick as I would reread Winter's Orbit. I would reread Winter's Orbit in a heartbeat. I think that you should get it and should read it, but I'm not saying like absolutely yes, full steam ahead, everyone should go read this book. It's very much like if you're interested in it, absolutely go check it out. If you're not interested in it, it's probably one you can skip. And then finally I read The Honeys, which if you've been tracking along, you know I said there was one 5-star book this month and I haven't mentioned a 5-star book yet. So it was so nice to end the month on a 5-star. So I did listen to the audiobook for The Honeys by Ryan LaSala, and the audiobook was so good. I like was in the middle of reading it and I texted one of my friends and I was like, I'm going to give you my library card login so that you can read this book when I finish, because this audiobook is so amazing. First off, it has one voice, so there's not like a full cast of characters, but it is a full production. So when they mention crickets, there are cricket noises. When they mention a door opening, they're like door opening noises. Our main character's sister is dead, and whenever she speaks, it sounds like a ghost is talking to you. It was just done so well. And this is a horror book. There was this scene that's like very horrifying where this like body is dissolving and everything, and the way they added sound effects and music and everything like made that scene so much more horrifying than if it hadn't had that. It just made me feel like someone who did this, who made this audiobook, truly loved it and was like giving their all to it. I could feel the love given to the production of this book. And so I highly recommend you go check out The Honeys audiobook. But what is it about? Our main character, who is gender fluid but mostly goes by he, him pronouns, he has a twin sister who has been going to this camp for years, and he hasn't been going there because of some issues he had a long time ago. So she's at this camp, this summer camp. All of a sudden she shows up in his room at night right at the beginning, and she tries to kill him, and in that attempt she dies. And so he decides to go back to the summer camp to try and investigate what happened, because when she left for the summer, she was perfectly fine. And how did she miraculously show up on his doorstep and try to kill him? Like, what happened? And when he's at this summer camp, he learns about this clique of girls called the Honeys, and they are like obsessed with each other. It reminded me a little bit of Bunny, except we're like one of the characters on the outside of the bunnies watching someone else get like controlled by them. And I just had such a good time with it. Such a good time. I will say, like, it took me a little bit to warm up to the book. While the audio was amazing, the story for me didn't really pick up until maybe close to 60%. There is a romance in the story. There is like found family in the story. There is like magical realism in the story. It gets so weird at the end, and it got so weird to the point that I was actually like, do I like this? Like, I had to sit with my decision to decide whether or not I was going to rate this book a 3-star or a 5-star. And after sitting with it for a while, I was like, no, I really enjoyed that, and I rated it a 5-star. Anyways, I miscounted. I had 12 books I read this month. I forgot that I read one right at the end of the month, and I forgot to put it like in my tracker. So one more book really quickly at the end, and that is the graphic novel adaptation of Demon in the Woods by Leigh Bardugo, which is based on her short story, The Demon in the Woods, which is about the Darkling and kind of just a story of his life when he was younger. It really doesn't explain anything about how he became who he was. It's just a story in his life. And I didn't like the short story, The Demon in the Woods. I think I rated it like a 2 or 3 star, but this I really enjoyed. I rated it a 4-star. I think this story really needed to be told in a graphic novel format. One, the artwork is so beautiful, like so beautiful, but also two, it's a very slow story. So a lot of that slowness can be just depicted in like a page of beautiful illustrations, and you go a lot faster, and the pacing is a lot better, and everything about it is just much better, much better done. So in the story, we're following the Darkling and his mother. They're kind of hiding from camp to camp to camp, trying to hide the fact that they are Grisha, and they come to this one camp, and they're staying there for a little bit of time, and the Darkling starts to make friends, sort of, starts to have people understand a little bit about his gift, and it's kind of like him becoming a villain, but it's also not. I love the twist, and the like surprise ending was really fun, but I don't really have much to say about this book, honestly. I really enjoyed it. If you can get your hands on it, I highly recommend it. Let me show you under the dust jacket. That's beautiful too. This page here, silver, like it's really fun. I'm really glad I have this because I like owning things that Leigh Bardugo makes, but overall, I don't think it's going to have like a lasting impact on me. The back of the book says the Darkling's origin story comes alive. I just don't really feel like it was his origin story. Change it earlier what I said to 12 books read this month. I hope you had a good reading month. Honestly, like even though I think about the fact that I struggled for most of this month to read at all, I knocked out a lot of books. Tell me down below if you have any sci-fi recommendations for me, please. If you have any horror recommendations, because we're about to hit spooky season. I hope you're doing well. I appreciate each and every one of you. I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I'll talk to you in the comments. Bye.